I wandered through the villa, my bare feet padding softly against the cool marble floors, the light from the setting sun casting a golden glow over everything. The house was quiet, too quiet for this time of the evening. Chris wouldn't be home for another hour, and in the silence my thoughts filled the space between us. This house was everything we dreamed of. I remember the day we first saw it, standing in the wide open living room, Chris grinning as he imagined our future here. It felt like we had made it. We'd worked so hard to build this life. Sleepless nights, job promotions, the endless hustle to prove ourselves in our careers. That was our goal back then, to build something stable before settling down. We both agreed marriage could wait, that there was no rush. Focus on our careers first, make sure we're financially secure, and everything else will follow. But now, 8 years later, I couldn't help but wonder if we'd lost sight of that everything else. I glanced at the framed photos on the shelves, smiling snapshots of our vacations, work parties, anniversaries. We looked so happy, and we were, in a way. But these pictures only told half the story. I wasn't the same girl who had stood beside Chris, wide-eyed and eager to build our empire. Back then, everything felt so fresh, so new, like we were unstoppable. But now it just felt like we were stuck. I walked to the large glass doors and opened them, stepping out onto the terrace. The villa overlooked a lush garden, with the sea in the distance, sparkling under the fading sun. We had everything. At least that's what people would say if they saw us. And maybe we did on the surface. But something was missing, and it gnawed at me more with each passing year. I leaned against the railing, letting the breeze brush against my skin as my thoughts drifted back to the early days with Chris. We were so full of life back then, both of us determined to carve out our place in the world. It was exciting. We were partners, dreamers, and best friends, always pushing each other to do better, to be better, and we did it. We had both climbed our respective ladders, reached the peaks of our careers, and lived in a house that looked like it had been pulled straight out of a lifestyle magazine. But now that excitement had settled into something else. Routine, comfort, stagnancy. Every morning was the same. We'd wake up, have coffee, exchange a few words, and then go off to work. Evenings were quiet, with the occasional dinner out or movie night, but nothing more. The conversations about our future, the wedding we once talked about, the kids we thought we'd eventually have, all of it seemed to have faded into the background, pushed aside for the now. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. It wasn't that I didn't love Chris. I did. But love alone wasn't enough anymore. I needed more, something to break us out of this comfortable lull we'd fallen into. I needed to know that we were moving forward, not just existing side by side like two people who happened to share a life. Every time I'd try to bring it up, marriage, our future, but Chris would always find a way to dodge the conversation, expertly steering it in another direction. "Let's enjoy tonight," he'd say. "Why rush into something when things are going so well?" But were they really going well? I turned away from the sea, walking back into the villa. The high ceilings and elegant decor, which had once made me feel so proud of what we'd built, now felt cold, empty. It was as if the villa itself had become a reflection of our relationship, beautiful on the outside, but hollow on the inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was waiting for something that might never come. I walked over to the kitchen counter, where my phone buzzed with a text from Chris. "Running late, don't wait up for me." A familiar knot tightened in my chest. Lately, it felt like he was always running late. Work, meetings, whatever it was, it always seemed to come before us. Before me. I placed the phone face down on the counter, staring at it for a moment before shaking my head. I knew what I wanted. I wanted a wedding. I wanted the commitment, the promise that we were in this for the long haul, not just coasting through life together. But every time I tried to talk to Chris about it, he'd change the subject or laugh it off, as if marriage was some outdated idea we didn't need anymore. But I needed it. I wasn't getting any younger, and every time I saw friends getting married, starting families, I couldn't help but feel left behind. What was the point of having it all? This villa, our careers, if we weren't going to take the next step? If Chris couldn't commit after 8 years, when would he ever be ready? I pressed my lips together, staring out at the garden. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for him to change. Maybe it was time to put myself first. For the first time, the thought crossed my mind, uninvited but persistent. If Chris doesn't want to marry me, maybe it's time to find someone who will. The idea scared me, but it also lit something inside me, a small spark of rebellion against the routine I had allowed to take over. Maybe it was time to stop settling for comfortable and start demanding what I truly deserved. I glanced at the clock, knowing Chris wouldn't be home for a while. There was still time to think, to weigh my options. But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't wait forever. The restaurant was beautiful, elegant lighting, soft music, and a table by the window overlooking the city skyline. It was the kind of place Chris knew I loved, with its quiet ambiance and attention to detail. Our 8th anniversary. 8 years of shared memories, laughter, challenges, and growth. 8 years of waiting. I smiled across the table at Chris as he reached for his wine glass, his easy charm as evident as ever. He looked as handsome as the day we met, if not more so. That same confident, boyish grin, those dark eyes that used to make my heart race, still had a hold on me. But tonight, there was something more than just love lingering in my chest, something heavier. It was the weight of 8 years without a proposal, without the commitment I'd been longing for. "Cheers to us," Chris said, raising his glass, and I clinked mine against his. 8 incredible years, Abs. Who would have thought? Who indeed? I took a sip of my wine, the rich flavor sliding over my tongue as I forced a smile. "Yeah, who would have thought?" I echoed, though the words felt empty. He smiled, not noticing the slight edge in my voice. For Chris, tonight was perfect, and in a way it was. The restaurant was perfect, the food impeccable, the conversation light and comfortable. This was how it always was with Chris, easy fun, like everything in our lives was just fine. But as we sat there, surrounded by candlelight and couples lost in their own worlds, my mind was elsewhere. The same nagging question replayed in my head, louder with every passing year. Why hadn't we taken the next step? I couldn't ignore it anymore. We had everything. We had built a life together. Our careers were thriving. We lived in a beautiful villa, and yet something essential was missing. Something we both had promised we'd get to one day. But that one day never came. I looked down at my plate, pushing around the perfectly cooked steak, trying to find the right moment to bring it up. Again. It was our anniversary, after all, and if there was ever a time to talk about our future, this was it. "Chris," I began, my voice softer than I intended. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about our future." He glanced up, and for a second I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew where this conversation was headed. He had to. We'd danced around it too many times already, but instead of acknowledging it, he leaned back in his chair, giving me that same relaxed smile. "Come on, Abs, it's our anniversary, let's not ruin the night with serious talk." There it was, the brush off. Again. I bit the inside of my cheek, trying to tamp down the frustration building inside me. I didn't want to ruin the night either, but how could I ignore the elephant in the room? How could I keep pretending that this, just being together without a future plan, was enough for me? "But don't you think it's important to talk about?" I pressed gently, trying to keep the tone light, even though my heart was tightening in my chest. "It's been 8 years, Chris. We've built a beautiful life together, but I don't want to keep waiting." Chris's expression didn't change, but I saw the way his fingers tightened around his wine glass. "Abs, we've talked about this before," he said, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. "We're happy. Why mess with that? Marriage is just a formality, right? We don't need a piece of paper to prove what we already have." I swallowed, feeling a lump form in my throat. This was the same line he'd used before. Every time I brought up marriage, every time I tried to talk about taking that next step, he'd say the same thing, that we didn't need to change anything, that we were already fine just the way we were. But were we? I stared down at the pristine tablecloth, the words catching in my throat. On the surface, everything was perfect. Chris was right. We were happy. We had a good life, a comfortable life. But it wasn't enough anymore. Not for me. I wanted more. I wanted the security, the commitment, the feeling of truly being partners for life. I wanted the wedding we used to talk about in our early days, the one with the beachside ceremony, the family and friends gathered, the vows we'd share, promising to love each other forever. And I was tired of pretending I didn't care that it hadn't happened. "Chris," I said, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. I love you. I love what we have. But I need to know if marriage is ever going to happen for us. I need to know if you're ever going to take that step with me. His eyes softened, but there was still that hint of distance behind them, like he was trying to avoid diving too deep into this conversation. Abs, you know I love you. But why rush? Things are great between us. Rush? I thought bitterly. 8 years isn't rushing. I forced a smile, pushing down the ache in my chest. This wasn't the first time I'd felt this way, but tonight the weight of it felt heavier than usual. I couldn't shake the thought that we were just stalling, and how much longer could I keep waiting for him to be ready? How much longer should I wait? I finished my wine, setting the glass down a little too carefully. I wasn't going to push it any further tonight. I knew better than that. But the question remained, lingering in the air between us, unanswered and unresolved. Chris reached across the table, taking my hand in his. Come on, let's enjoy tonight. I booked us a suite at the Ritz. We'll have breakfast there tomorrow, just the two of us. I nodded, feeling the tension ease slightly. Chris was trying. In his way, he was showing me he cared. But the shadow of doubt still hung over me. How long was I willing to keep having these same conversations? How long was I willing to wait for him to propose? As the waiter came to clear our plates, I looked at Chris, his easy smile still in place, and wondered if he truly understood how much this meant to me, or if he ever would. I stared out the car window as Chris drove us back from the restaurant, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. His hand rested casually on the gear shift, his face calm and focused on the road ahead, as if the weight of our conversation at dinner hadn't fazed him at all. I tried to keep my thoughts from spiraling, but the frustration simmered just beneath the surface. It always came back to the same question. When did we stop moving forward? As we passed through familiar streets, memories of our early days together flickered in my mind like an old movie reel, playing the highlights of when everything had been so much simpler, so full of promise. I could still picture the tiny apartment we had shared in those first few years. It was cramped, with its peeling paint and worn-out furniture, but it was ours. We were just two young, ambitious people in love, dreaming of everything we were going to achieve together. I remembered that one night in particular, the night we made the promise. It was late, and we had just returned from another exhausting day at work. I was trying to climb my way up in marketing, while Chris was hustling at his law firm, juggling long hours and endless paperwork. We were both so hungry for success back then, so eager to make something of ourselves. We collapsed onto the couch, laughing about something silly, our bodies tangled together in that comfortable way that only comes after knowing someone inside and out. The room was dim, the only light coming from the soft glow of a lamp on the table. Chris ran his fingers through my hair, brushing it back from my face as I rested my head on his chest. I could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing, his heartbeat a comforting rhythm beneath my ear. One day, he had said, his voice soft but full of conviction. One day, we're going to have it all. Abs, the careers, the house, the wedding. But we just need to focus on building our lives first. We need to be stable, to make sure we're secure before we settle down. I had nodded, feeling so sure in that moment that we were on the same path. It made sense, didn't it? We were still so young, with so much potential. The wedding could wait. We had time. We'll get there, I had said, squeezing his hand. Once we're settled, we'll have the wedding of our dreams. We both had laughed, imagining the grand ceremony, the beachside vows, and the future we were so sure was just within our reach. We made a promise to each other that night, careers first, then marriage. And I had believed it. I had believed that once we climbed the ladder of success, once we made a name for ourselves and built our lives together, everything would fall into place. Marriage would naturally follow, like the next chapter in our love story. But that was years ago. The car jolted slightly as Chris turned into the long, winding road that led to our villa. The villa we had worked so hard for, the one we had dreamt of owning during those long nights in that tiny apartment. It was our symbol of success, proof of everything we had achieved together. But now, as we approached the house, its grandeur felt cold to me, almost hollow. We had reached the goals we set for ourselves, the careers, the wealth, the life we had always wanted. So why did it feel like something was still missing? Back then, I had been just as focused on my ambitions as Chris. We had been a team, both of us striving toward the same dreams, and for a while that had been enough. But somewhere along the way, I had reached a point where my ambitions weren't enough anymore. I didn't just want success or financial stability. I wanted the commitment we had promised each other. I wanted a future where we didn't just live together but built something deeper, something lasting. As the villa came into view, standing tall against the backdrop of the night sky, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. I thought about that old apartment, about the way Chris used to look at me with so much certainty about the future. It had all seemed so simple back then. But now, years later, with everything we had achieved, the one thing I wanted most felt farther away than ever. Chris parked the car and turned off the engine, the soft click of the keys in the ignition pulling me out of my thoughts. He glanced over at me with that same easy smile, unaware of the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "You okay?" he asked casually. I forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, just tired." But it wasn't just exhaustion, it was the weight of 8 years of that broken promise that still hung in the air between us, unspoken but always present. I had kept up my end of the deal. We both had. We had prioritized our careers, accumulated wealth, built this beautiful life together. But now that we had everything we said we wanted, the wedding, the future we had promised, was nowhere in sight. I followed Chris into the house, the spacious, luxurious villa we now called home. The echoes of our earlier laughter and shared dreams seemed distant now, replaced by a routine that felt too comfortable, too predictable. As I walked through the grand hallway, the familiar ache in my chest deepened. The villa was perfect, just like our lives seemed to be. But there was no ring on my finger, no vows exchanged, no next chapter to look forward to. Just the same question circling my mind every time I thought about the future. How much longer am I willing to wait? That night, as we lay in bed, Chris asleep beside me, I stared up at the ceiling, my mind racing. I loved him, I did. But love wasn't enough anymore. I needed more than just a comfortable routine. I needed a future, a wedding, a family. And the more time passed, the more I began to question whether Chris saw that future with me, or if he was just content to keep things exactly the way they were, comfortable, predictable, and stagnant. Does he even want to marry me? The thought hit me like a punch to the gut, and I couldn't shake it. I had never questioned it before, but now, after 8 years of waiting, I wasn't so sure anymore. And that uncertainty was starting to eat away at me. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of Chris breathing softly beside me, I couldn't help but wonder, how much longer can I wait for a future that might never come? I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, as if trying to find strength in my own eyes. My heart was pounding, and my hands felt cold, but I had made up my mind. After 8 years, this was it. There would be no more waiting, no more pushing aside my own dreams to accommodate someone else's fears. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I deserved a real answer. I deserved a future, whether it was with Chris or without him. The thought of life without Chris sent a sharp ache through me. We had built a life together in this beautiful villa, a life that from the outside looked perfect. But inside, I had been waiting, hoping, and slowly losing myself in the process. Today, all that was going to change. I walked into the living room, where Chris was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone as if it were just another normal Saturday. My chest tightened with anxiety, but I didn't back down. This was too important. "Chris," I said, my voice steady even though my heart felt like it was about to explode. He looked up, eyes softening when they landed on me. "Hey, what's up?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather every ounce of courage I had left. "We need to talk, seriously." His expression shifted, a hint of wariness creeping in. He set his phone down, leaning forward. "Okay, what's this about?" I sat down across from him, my hands clasped tightly together. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about our future. And I can't keep waiting for something that might never happen." Chris frowned, his brow furrowing. "Abby, what are you talking about? We're good, aren't we? Why are you making this into something more complicated than it needs to be?" There it was again, his refusal to acknowledge the problem, his insistence that everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine, and it hadn't been for a long time. "I'm not trying to make things complicated," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "But after 8 years, I need to know if we're moving forward, if we're going to get married, or if I'm wasting my time." He blinked, clearly caught off guard by my directness. "Abby, we've talked about this." "No," I interrupted, surprising myself with how firm I sounded. "We haven't really talked about it. Every time I bring up marriage, you avoid the conversation, and I can't do that anymore, Chris. I need to know where we're headed." His expression tightened, and I could see the discomfort in his eyes. "Why does it have to be about marriage? We're happy the way things are, aren't we?" I shook my head, feeling the frustration rising inside me again. "We were happy, but now, I don't know. It feels like we're stuck. We've built this life, but it's not enough for me anymore. I want more, and if you don't, then I need to know now." The silence between us felt heavy, and for a moment, Chris just stared at me, as if searching for the right thing to say. But when he spoke, it wasn't what I wanted to hear. "I don't understand why marriage is so important. We're already together. We have everything we need." I could feel the tears welling up, but I held them back. "It's not just about the marriage, Chris. It's about knowing that you're committed to me, that you want a future with me. And if you can't give me that, then I need to move on." His eyes widened in shock, and I could see the panic flash across his face. "Move on? You're talking about leaving?" I nodded, even though it felt like my heart was breaking with each word. "Yes. If marriage isn't something you want, then I have to find someone who does. I can't spend the rest of my life waiting for something that's never going to happen." He stared at me, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the couch as if trying to anchor himself. "You're giving me an ultimatum?" "I guess I am," I said softly. "I don't want to, but I don't see any other way. I love you, Chris, but I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of staying comfortable." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the way he struggled to find a response. But in the end, all he could say was, "I need time." "Time?" I repeated, feeling a mix of disappointment and resignation. "We've had 8 years, Chris. How much more time do you need?" He looked away, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I need to think." I stood up, my heart aching but my resolve unshaken. "I'm not going to wait forever," I said quietly, turning toward the door. "I hope you figure out what you want, Chris, but I need to start thinking about what I want." As I walked out of the room, I felt the weight of uncertainty settle over me like a dark cloud. Chris had said he needed time, but how much time was enough? Would he ever be ready to give me the future I dreamed of? Or had I just set myself up for more disappointment? I didn't know. And that was the hardest part, waiting in the unknown, wondering if this was the end of everything we had built together, or if it was the beginning of something new. All I knew for sure was that I couldn't wait any longer. "Because I want more than this," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I've wanted more for years, and I've been patient, but I'm not getting any younger, Chris. I need to know. If you don't see a future with me, I need to know that now." Chris looked at me, his eyes wide with confusion and maybe a little fear. "Why are you making this into something it doesn't need to be? We're good, Abby. We have everything we need. Why is marriage so important?" I felt the frustration boiling inside me, bubbling up in a way that was hard to control. "Because it's a commitment, Chris. It's a promise that we're building a future together. I've been waiting for you to be ready, but I'm starting to think that maybe you never will be." He frowned, shifting uncomfortably. "It's not that I don't want to be with you, Abby. I love you. Isn't that enough?" "No, Chris, it's not enough." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. I couldn't keep holding it in. "I deserve to know if you see a future with me. I deserve more than just this comfortable routine we've fallen into." He ran a hand through his hair, looking exasperated. "I don't get why you're so hung up on this. We're happy, aren't we? What difference does a wedding make?" "It's not just about the wedding," I said, my voice softer now, but filled with desperation. "It's about knowing that you're committed to me in the same way I've been committed to you. I've waited, Chris. I've waited for years, hoping you'd be ready. But I can't wait forever." Chris stared at me, his jaw clenched, clearly struggling to find the right words. But then he said the one thing I had been dreading. I don't see why anything has to change. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I had known, deep down, that this was how he felt, but hearing him say it aloud made it real. My chest tightened, my heart breaking a little more with each passing second. "You don't want to get married," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. "It's not that," he insisted, but I could hear the defensiveness in his tone. "I just don't think we need to rush into something just because you feel like it's the next step. Chris, it's not rushing. It's been 8 years. How much longer do you expect me to wait?" He looked away, avoiding my gaze, and I felt a knot of frustration tightening in my throat. "Why are you so afraid of commitment?" I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of the question. He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, and in that moment, I knew. I knew that this wasn't just about marriage. It wasn't about the ceremony or the rings. It was about something deeper, his fear of truly committing to me, of taking that step and making it real. And that fear wasn't going away anytime soon. I blinked back the tears that threatened to fall, my heart heavy with the realization that I had been avoiding for too long. I loved Chris, but I couldn't wait forever. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. "If you can't see a future with me," I said, my voice shaking, "then I need to know, because I'm not going to spend the rest of my life waiting for something that's never going to happen." Chris looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, regret, maybe, or confusion, but he still didn't answer. And that silence was the answer I needed. I stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me, but I didn't falter. "I'm not going to keep living in this limbo, Chris. I deserve more than that." I walked out of the bedroom, my heart pounding, knowing that this was the turning point. Whether he realized it or not, something had shifted between us. And I wasn't sure if things would ever be the same again. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I couldn't sit around waiting for Chris to figure out what he wanted. After that conversation, the air between us had become thick with tension. We still lived under the same roof, shared the same bed, but everything felt different. I knew I couldn't let myself fall into despair while I waited for an answer that might never come. So, I threw myself into my work. The energy that had once gone into planning a future with Chris now fueled my projects. I was productive. No, relentless. And it felt good. I stayed late at the office, with us even volunteering for assignments I might have passed on before. It kept my mind busy, kept me from overthinking the silence between Chris and me. And on the weekends, I started going out again. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in months, some in years. It was strange how easy it was to slip back into the social world I had neglected for so long, to laugh over drinks, talk about life, and feel like myself again, someone who wasn't just waiting for a man to make up his mind. That's when I ran into Liam. We had been close back in college, always studying together, grabbing coffee between classes. There had been a spark back then, but I was with Chris, and Liam had his own relationships. We stayed friends, nothing more, until life eventually pulled us in different directions. But seeing him again after so many years felt like a breath of fresh air. We bumped into each other at a networking event, of all places. He looked different, more mature, more settled, but the smile he gave me was exactly the same as I remembered. "Abby?" His voice had a way of pulling me back in time. "Liam? Wow, it's been ages." We caught up over drinks, and I learned that he had just come out of a long-term relationship, too. He was now single, successful in his career, and looking for something more. It didn't take long for us to start meeting up regularly. He wasn't pushy, just easy to be around, had someone who understood the complexities of where I was emotionally. It didn't help that every time we met, I felt that old connection between us rekindling. He asked me how things were with Chris, and I told him the truth, that I was waiting. But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe waiting for Chris was a mistake. Liam, on the other hand, represented something different. A future where I wasn't endlessly waiting, where the commitment I craved wasn't some elusive goal to chase. I could see it in the way he talked about life, about relationships. He wanted a family, a home, everything that I did. He was ready for all the things Chris seemed to be avoiding. As weeks went by, my mind wandered more often to what my life might like with someone like Liam. I started imagining a future where I wasn't caught in limbo, where I wasn't second-guessing my worth or my desires. One evening, after a casual dinner with Liam, he walked me to my car. As we stood under the soft glow of streetlights, there was a quietness between us that felt heavy with possibilities. He looked at me, his expression open and honest, and I could tell he wanted to say something. "I've always admired you, Abby," Liam finally said, his voice soft but steady. "Back in college, I thought you were the most driven, thoughtful person I'd ever met. And seeing you now, well, I still feel the same way." His words lingered in the air, and I felt a flutter in my chest, a sensation I hadn't felt in a long time. It was terrifying and exhilarating. "Liam," I started, unsure how to respond. "This is complicated." "I know," he said, taking a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "I don't want to make things harder for you, but I also don't want to hide how I feel. I'm ready for something real, Abby. I don't know where you stand, but if you ever want to talk about what we could have, I'm here." I stood there, speechless. Part of me wanted to step into the life Liam was offering, a life that felt so clear and attainable. But the other part of me was still tethered to Chris, to the years we had spent building a life together. As I drove home that night, my thoughts were a whirlwind. Liam represented the kind of stability and commitment I had always wanted. But could I really let go of Chris after everything we had been through? Was I ready to walk away from our history, or was I holding on to a future with him that might never come? The next few days were a blur of conflicted feelings. I spent more time with Liam, enjoying the easy comfort of his company, but Chris was always in the back of my mind. Every evening I returned to the villa we shared, where Chris and I danced around the growing chasm between us. I had a decision to make. I could keep waiting for Chris to commit, to finally give me the future I had dreamed of for so long. Or I could take a leap, move on with someone like Liam, who was already offering me the life I wanted. The weight of that choice felt heavier with each passing day. And deep down, I knew that no matter what I chose, everything was about to change. The evening air felt heavier than usual as I stepped through the front door of our villa. The house was silent, the dim lighting casting long shadows over the familiar space. Chris was waiting for me in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped together as if gathering the courage to speak. I knew something was coming. Ever since that night, the night I told him I needed more, our lives had shifted into an uncomfortable limbo. I had spent weeks waiting for this moment, yet now that it was here, a strange unease settled over me. "Abby?" he started, his voice quieter than usual. His eyes met mine, and I could see the weight of his thoughts, the hesitation in the way he looked at me. I didn't respond, choosing instead to sit across from him, my heartbeat quickening in anticipation. This was it, his decision. The moment I had been waiting for all these years, and yet I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it. Chris let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with the words. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, finally breaking the silence. "About marriage, about our future." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm, to let him speak. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear what came next or not. "I'll be honest, Abby, I've been scared of what marriage might do to us, to me." He paused, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. "I've always thought that we had everything, this life, this house, each other. I didn't want anything to change." I swallowed hard, waiting for him to continue. My mind flickered back to the nights I had spent longing for this exact conversation, to the countless times I'd tried to bring it up only to be shut down. And now, here he was, finally opening up. "But then I realized something," Chris went on, his eyes softening as he looked at me. "I realized that by holding back, by avoiding marriage, I was the one stopping us from moving forward. I was the one keeping us stuck." He took a deep breath, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you, Abby. I don't want to lose you. I thought I was protecting us by keeping things the way they were, but now I see that I was wrong. You deserve more. We deserve more." Chris leaned forward, reaching for my hand. "Let's get married, Abby. Let's finally make this official." My heart should have soared. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the words I had desperately wanted to hear for so long. And yet, something inside me felt different now. The weeks of waiting, of rediscovering who I was, of reconnecting with old parts of myself. They had changed me. I looked down at our joined hands, the warmth of his familiar touch grounding me in the moment. But my mind was somewhere else, the version of me that had sat here day after day, wishing for a ring, for a proposal, for the promise of forever. That version of Abby wasn't the same anymore. Chris's voice cut through my thoughts, gentle but filled with a sense of urgency. "Abby, say something." I took a deep breath, pulling my hand away, and stood up. My legs felt unsteady as I paced the room, trying to gather my thoughts. This was it, the proposal I had fought for. And yet, why did it feel so wrong? I don't know, Chris, I finally said, my voice shaking. I've spent so long waiting for this, for you to say those words, but now I'm not sure. His face fell, confusion flashing in his eyes. What do you mean? What do you mean? This is what you wanted, isn't it? I thought it was, I admitted, turning to face him. But over the past few weeks, I've started to realize that I need more than just a proposal. I need to know that we're moving forward for the right reasons, not because I gave you an ultimatum, or because you're scared of losing me. Chris stood, his face pale with the weight of my words. Abby, I'm doing this because I love you. I don't want to lose what we have. I know, I said softly, and I love you too, but I'm not sure if love is enough anymore. The words hung heavy in the air, both of us standing there in the living room, the walls of our life together closing in around us. I thought about Liam, about how easy it was to imagine a future with someone who was already on the same page as me. And then I thought about Chris, the man I had spent 8 years with, the man I had built a life with. But was it the life I wanted now? I've changed, Chris, I said, my voice breaking. I'm not the same person I was when we started this relationship. I've grown, and I need to know that if we get married, it's because we're truly ready for it, not because we're afraid of losing each other. Chris stepped closer, his hands trembling as he reached for me again. I'll prove it to you, Abby. I'll do whatever it takes. I looked into his eyes, feeling the depth of his love, but also the fear that lingered beneath it. He was finally willing to take the step I had always wanted, but now I wasn't sure if it was too late. I need time, I whispered, pulling away. The weight of those words sank into the room as I turned and walked toward the door, leaving Chris standing alone in the quiet villa we had once called home. I wasn't walking away. Not yet. But I needed space to figure out what my heart truly wanted. The sun dipped low on the horizon as I stood on the balcony of our villa, the golden light spilling into the space. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of blooming jasmine from the garden below. This place, once filled with dreams and laughter, felt foreign to me now. I had spent 8 years building a life with Chris, yet as the sun set on another day, I felt as if I was standing at the edge of a precipice, peering into the unknown. The conversation with Chris replayed in my mind, each word echoing against the walls of my heart. He had finally expressed his love, his desire to marry me, but the weight of that promise felt heavy. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the fear of losing me, but I also recognized the hesitation that lingered beneath his bravado. And then there was Liam. The spark between us had reignited something within me, a sense of hope and excitement I hadn't felt in years. He was straightforward, ready for commitment, and eager to build a future together. As I thought of him, I felt a warmth spread through me, a stark contrast to the turmoil that consumed my heart when I thought of Chris. I closed my eyes and leaned against the balcony railing, trying to sort through my feelings. Was it possible that what I truly wanted was not just marriage, but the sense of security and partnership that came with it? Did I want Chris, or was I simply craving the idea of commitment? Flashes of my journey played in my mind, the laughter-filled nights, the quiet moments shared over dinner, the promises made in the early days. But those memories were now laced with the frustration of unanswered questions and the gnawing feeling that something essential was missing. I had invested so much in this relationship, but at what cost? A part of me felt tethered to Chris, the comfort of familiarity, the depth of shared history. Yet another part whispered that I had the right to seek more, to find someone who could meet me where I was and share the same vision for the future. The thought of choosing between them sent a wave of dread through me. I could see a life with Chris, one filled with love and companionship. But would it be enough? And then there was the allure of starting anew with Liam, someone who could give me what I had been longing for all along, a commitment, a shared goal, and the promise of a family. I turned my gaze toward the sunset, watching as the sky transformed from gold to a rich hue of violet and deep blue. It was beautiful and chaotic, just like my heart. I couldn't keep delaying my decision. I owed it to myself to choose the path that would lead to my own happiness, regardless of how difficult it might be. As the last rays of sunlight slipped below the horizon, I felt a shift within me, a flicker of clarity. I had to be honest with myself. I wanted more than just a proposal. I wanted to feel cherished, valued, and ready for a life of love and partnership. With a deep breath, I thought of the conversation I had with Chris. I could hear his voice, feel his touch, and see the sincerity in his eyes. But I also envisioned the laughter and excitement with Liam, the sense of possibility, and the thrill of embarking on a new journey together. It was time. I took one last look at the fading light, allowing the moment to wash over me. I had to choose, and I would choose not just for myself, but for the future I wanted to create. As I stepped back inside, I felt a newfound sense of determination. I would not allow fear to dictate my choices. I would not settle for a comfortable routine if it meant sacrificing my dreams. Tonight I would confront Chris one last time. I would tell him how I truly felt, what I needed, and I would let him know that while I cherished our time together, I couldn't stay in a relationship without the promise of a shared future. But I also had to face Liam. If I decided to embrace this new chapter, I would need to be honest with him as well. I had to make a choice, and I would make it with the courage I had discovered within myself. The decision loomed ahead of me, and I felt the weight of it pressing against my chest. But it was time to take control of my life. I would choose a path that led to my happiness, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. I took one final deep breath, my heart racing with anticipation. The choice was mine, and whatever happened next, I would embrace it fully, ready to chase the life I had always dreamed of, whether with Chris, Liam, or on my own. Tonight would change everything. A year had passed since that pivotal night on the balcony, and now I stood in a sunlit garden, adorned with white roses and twinkling fairy lights. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the soft sound of laughter from our friends and family, gathered to celebrate the love Chris and I had fought so hard to rekindle. I adjusted my veil and glanced at the mirror, my heart racing. I was no longer the woman who felt trapped by uncertainty. I was a woman who had made choices, embraced change, and ultimately found my way back to the person who had captured my heart so many years ago. As the stars twinkled above, I knew we were stepping into a future filled with hope. We had chosen each other, not just as partners, but as lifelong companions, ready to navigate the beautiful chaos of life together. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and love, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was just the beginning of our journey, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us. The end. If you're enjoying the love stories here on True Hearts Presents, don't forget to subscribe. By subscribing, you'll never miss an update, and you'll be the first to know when we drop new romantic tales that will sweep you off your feet. Hit that notification bell too, so you'll get alerted whenever we post fresh content. Let's keep this journey of love going together. Subscribe now, and stay tuned for more heartfelt stories.